Thank you so much, Ambassador Morningstar Ministers. What a fine way to kick off our first session. Our next session is on Europe without Russian gas, a lasting legacy of war, ? And I'm pleased that we have a very special guest joining us, joining this conversation at the top of the panel, Amos Hochstein, who is the White House Senior Advisor to the President for Energy and Investment and a Deputy Assistant to the President as well. Amos, there's only a few people out there, if any, who've worked on these issues from so many different angles for 25 to 30 years, is it now? So we're just going to jump right into it. I'm just really honored to have you here with us today. How have the last 16 months changed administration's view towards natural gas and its role in the energy transition, the way we talk about the definition of energy security overall and the role that gas can play there? And I would also say how we can utilize gas as a mechanism to work with our allies.
Well, first, Olga, thank you for having me, and it's good to be here. Thanks for mentioning that it's been 30 years that I've been working on this. Makes me feel great. Happy to do that. Working just 10 years ago or so, more than 10 years ago when we started the Energy Bureau at the State Department when Secretary Clinton, President Obama did that, was exactly because of this question, actually. This was the issue that we faced. It's also good to look around the audience and see that I have several of my colleagues from the Energy Bureau from 10 years ago and 12 years ago sitting in the audience today. What caused the creation of bringing energy and gas into the foreign policy realm of how we approach was Europe. We looked at it from a global perspective, but it was really a Europe issue. Just to remind folks that when President Obama came into power in 2009, January 20th, that was the day that the Russians had shut off gas, I think on January 1st or 2nd, and it lasted until January 20th. So when Secretary Clinton came into office as Secretary of State and made her round of phone calls, the first thing she heard from Central and Eastern European leaders was largely, you guys got to change this. We can't have this every few years. So we've been in this conversation for a very long time. I don't think that the last 16 months really changed how we think about natural gas. I think it changed what we had to do. And I think it had two impacts in opposite directions. And if you look at the document of the joint statement that President Biden and President van der Leyen had together in, I think it was March 25 of 2022, which addressed the gas crisis as the war had just started. And it talked about, the document, the joint statement had two pillars to it. One was diversifying, helping Europe diversify away from Russian gas. And the second was helping Europe diversify away from reliance on gas, period. And I think that's the way that we see natural gas today is still an important part of the energy transition, but it's part of the energy transition, which means we want to get to the other side of it. And we want to have a way to make sure that we manage the energy transition so we have enough oil and gas into the future as we build up the structures and the networks and the infrastructure for a cleaner energy system. So clearly gas is cleaner than coal, and we have to have it as a supply for as long as we need it, but we need to get to that other side of it. So we have to focus on energy security of supply, meaning that we have enough renewables, that we have enough baseload capacity that works with renewables, and that we can get to that cleaner energy economy as quickly as possible while not losing sight that we can't have energy shocks, because energy shocks are not only economic issues, and concerns, they are also geopolitical and national security concerns. So that's the management of that.
You mentioned the gas shutoffs in 2006, 2009, and then of course, broader lessons that we learned. And Europe has invested quite a bit to build out that infrastructure following these. I mean, these shutoffs actually inspired Europe to get out there and build out interconnections, north, south, not just with Russia. But there are broader lessons here, not just for natural gas, right? In terms of as we build out the clean energy economy, and in terms of not relying on just one supplier, how does that translate into the clean energy development?
So let me start from the beginning of your question, because I think a lot of the work that we did together, the US and the EU, 10 years ago, was creating those alternative energy infrastructures and on natural gas. And I think the importance of noting that even today as we look to move forward is important, because that's what enabled Europe to mitigate against the Russian cutoff of natural gas. Without Kirk Island and the ability to the reverse flow that happened that used to go from Ukraine down to Bulgaria and ultimately to Greece, but to go the other direction, all those things that we did 10 years ago had tremendous impact and meaning these last 18 months as we've diversified and brought in additional capacity. You can bring out a lot of LNG into Europe or new sources of, or bigger volumes of pipe gas, but if you can't move them around, if you can't move the molecules around, you wouldn't be able to affect that change. That is important as we look now, because to the core of your question, energy security means not learning the lesson from the war in Ukraine, that Europe should not be reliant on Russia for gas. The lesson is also not a broader lesson of Europe should not be reliant on Russia. It is that no one should be overly reliant, specifically in energy, on any single supplier. So as we get to a cleaner energy economy, we are at the same risk, if not greater risk, of repeating the exact same mistake. And the way I see it is, we had a 20th century architecture, and if we're not careful, we could fall into repeating the 21st century energy architecture mistakes of the 20th. And that means that as we look for clean energy supply chains, for manufacturing of solar panels and wind turbines and critical minerals and rare earths, and that entire supply chain of where it comes from, we are already so far behind, and we run the risk of having that dependency on one supplier. It may not be Russia, it may be China in this instance, but we have to, that's the lesson from this war. It is not a Russia lesson, it is a dependence lesson.
Much broader. Let's take a quick stock of where we're at right now. Overall, last year, with help from US and other supplies, Europe was able to withstand Russia just shutting off its exports to Europe for the most part, with several just very small exceptions. So right now, looking into this switch, is this permanent? Is Europe done with Russian gas? And my second question to follow up on this, is there a scenario where instead of blackmailing Europe and stopping supplies, where Putin decides, I'm going to flood the market. The blackmail didn't work. I'm going to flood the market with cheap gas. And in that scenario, would we consider sanctioning natural gas?
I don't, look, you asked two different questions.
Yes.
One is on the, where are we on the supply side? Ironically, I think that they still supply through Ukraine.
Yes, and Turkey a little bit, yes.
Right, 45 MCM.
And LNG, don't forget about that.
Yes, so there's still some supply coming in. I think we've done as much as we can on a bilateral basis of cooperation to surge capacity from the United States, from the Middle East, from North Africa, from Egypt, Israel, to make sure that Europe can be in a position, as good a position as possible. And what that means is that the refill season of injection of gas into storage is at the max level, and I think we're pretty much going to be there at the beginning of the heating season. You'll be at 90%, north of 90% across. So we've done everything we can, and I think as long as the war is continuing, we will be living sort of winter to winter. We got lucky the last couple of winters with fairly mild winters, and so the math really relies on that. If we have a cold winter, we're still at risk. This is not something that we see, oh, this winter is going to be fine because we have a lot in storage. If we have a colder than average winter, and depending when the cold snaps are, we still run a risk of having some shortages. Not that we won't have enough gas for people's homes to heat, but perhaps on the industrial side, we may have some shortages that we'll have to mitigate. And so we have to stand guard, and that's why we set up the US-EU task force to look at emergencies. It's not to do the regular work of the US-EU Energy Council, but rather the emergency side. So I don't think that we're out of the woods, and I don't think we'll be out of the woods for a couple of more years, assuming the war goes on as additional supplies come onto the market from Qatar, from the US, et cetera. And I think then we kind of get to that, the peak. I don't really think that we need additional infrastructure to be built beyond what's already planned. So I think that that's how I see where we are today. As far as the your second question on the strategy, look, I think Putin is throwing a lot at the wall as far as his strategies. I think the bottom line is, as long as the US and the EU are able to continue to work so closely together with the support of our allies from sort of the non-geographic West, you know, we've had so much support from Japan and Korea and Taiwan and the East Med, that has enabled us to continue to focus on making sure. So I don't see those strategies that he may take are going to be successful, and if they are, I think we'll have solutions for them. Even not on gas, but on oil, the price cap, despite the fact that everybody thought in the market that it wouldn't work, that was largely because people feel that when something's new and never been tried before, then they tend to think it's not going to work. Even the financial industry today says that it's worked beyond expectations. Again, nothing's perfect, and I never declare victory, but so far so good. We've been able to keep prices a little bit lower. Most importantly, as keeping price of both natural gas and oil low, and we are relatively low where we are right now, that is the most effective tool to keep Russian revenues for their war, and we're seeing that with their reaction of trying to raise money from oligarchs and businesses and so on. That's what we have to focus on and keep a delta between what they sell, what the market price is, and make sure we put pressure to discount Russian energy products.
We only have 30 seconds left. What's our next big shock potential risk to the energy system, and how do we mitigate that? How do we get ahead of that working together with our allies?
You know, it's hard to predict. I think that we want to look at the energy supply system as holistic. And we now have to look at oil and gas just as much as we look at the critical minerals. And there, I think we have a great national security risk of supply shock. We have low prices at the moment, but we have over-concentration in one area. So everybody wants to invest in a gigafactory. Not many want to invest in mining and processing. The problem is you can't have a gigafactory without the mining and the processing. So we have to have a globally diversified system. The IRA was a giant step forward. I think we have to do a lot more to bring the world together. Otherwise, as soon as the next geopolitical crisis happens, the tool that can be used is to stop supply of solar panels, stop supply of batteries, stop supply of components, which could really have an impact on the global economy and specifically on the US and European economies. So I worry about that. I look at the number of vehicles sold. I'm very happy about how many electric vehicles are sold in Europe. I'm not as happy about the origin of most of them. So I think we have to have a more diversified, globally diversified system to prevent that shock that you're talking about. I think it's around the corner.
Amos, this was fantastic. As always, we love hosting you at the Atlantic Council. Please come back soon. It is my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this upcoming panel, Dr. Benjamin Schmidt, who is the Senior Fellow, Department of Physics and Astronomy at the Kleinman Center for Energy and Policy at the University of Pennsylvania. And he will take over as the moderator to introduce our fantastic panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And most importantly, Ben was also in the Energy Bureau.